For years into my relationship with Clark, my father abruptly stopped my monthly allowance in March. No warning, no reason, just radio silence when I tried reaching out to ask why. Clark picked up on the shift in our lifestyle almost instantly. We'd been living well in a cozy downtown two-bedroom apartment. I covered rent and most bills with Dad's transfers, while Clark chipped in what he could. We enjoyed dinners out twice weekly, weekend getaways, and never fretted over finances. But when the funds dried up, everything changed. I took on extra work hours to keep up expenses. Clark suggested moving to a cheaper place, but I wasn't ready to scale back our life. I dipped into my savings to preserve our routine while sorting out what was going on with my dad. Almost immediately, Clark's behavior shifted. He stopped pushing for fancy restaurants and started preparing meals at home. He canceled our gym membership, suggesting we jog outdoors instead. When I shopped for groceries, he scrutinized every non-essential item. I saw it as him being practical and supportive. Clark had always been savvy with money and planning, so I thought he was helping us navigate a temporary rough patch. I was grateful for his efforts to ease the strain. Over the next few months, though, Clark grew more distant. He'd stay out late, offering vague explanations when he returned. When I asked about his day, he'd brush me off with curt responses and pivot the conversation. He stopped planning weekend outings and got annoyed when I suggested things to do. I chalked it up to financial stress. We were both working longer hours and spending less time together. I figured once I resolved things with my dad, life would snap back to normal. Clark just needed time to adapt to our new reality. By July, Clark started mentioning his co-worker Avery constantly. She bought a flashy new car and was planning lavish trips. He seemed captivated by her lifestyle, bringing her up in nearly every conversation. It irritated me, but I didn't suspect anything. Throughout the summer, I kept trying to reach my dad. He picked up occasionally, but kept our talk short, saying he was swamped and would call back, then never did. I left voicemails wondering if I'd done something to upset him. He never clarified why the money stopped. Clark grew increasingly frustrated with my family drama as the months dragged on. He told me to fix whatever I had broken instead of burning through our savings. He accused me of being too stubborn to admit fault. After money-related arguments, he started crashing on the couch. By October, Clark barely spoke to me except to gripe about costs. He ate dinner glued to the TV, scrolling on his phone for hours. When I proposed doing something special for my November birthday, he shot it down, saying we couldn't afford to celebrate. Determined, I picked up extra shift to save for a birthday dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date. I booked a table and told Clark weeks ahead, and he agreed to join. I was thrilled at the chance to reconnect. That Saturday evening, I waited at the restaurant 20 minutes past our reservation. Clark was never late for important things. I texted him, but got no reply. The hostess kept checking if I wanted to order as couples filled the tables around me. Then Clark's brother, Thomas, walked in, phone in hand. Without a word, he set it on the table and played a recording. Clark's voice blared. He wasn't coming. He'd been using me for my money all along, but since Dad cut me off, I was useless to him. For years of faking love had worn him out. He was already with someone worth his time and told me not to contact him. The message went on, mocking how pathetic I'd become without my family's wealth, revealing he'd been seeing someone for months and was moving in with her. He said I should have fixed things with my dad instead of expecting him to live modestly. The entire restaurant heard every word. A server froze, staring. An elderly couple nearby looked horrified. Kids at other tables asked their parents what was happening. Stunned, I looked at Thomas, who just shrugged and said he was told to ensure everyone heard. I grabbed my purse and left without a word. My phone pinged with a text from Clark listing items he'd collect from our apartment. He'd orchestrated this public humiliation to make it clear he saw me as worthless without my dad's money, using his brother to deliver the blow in the cruelest way possible. But Clark never asked a critical question. Why had my dad really stopped the payments? He just assumed I'd messed up and ran with it. Now he's about to learn what happens when you try to destroy someone whose father was only testing if you truly loved his daughter. First update. The response to my story has been overwhelming, and I'm tearing up and laughing at your comments calling Clark a gold digger. Because that's exactly what this jerk is. But it gets so much worse than I first shared. After fleeing the restaurant, I drove home in a daze, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. Having his brother play that message so publicly was cold and calculated, pure cruelty I never saw coming. When I got to the apartment, Clark had already been there like a burglar. Half his stuff was gone, including his PlayStation and the fancy coffee maker I bought. He left a note on the counter, listing more items he wanted to pick up, complete with specific times he'd return. Then, as I sat there reeling, my phone exploded with texts, not from Clark, but from his mom, Marie. She asked if I was okay, saying she'd heard what happened. I thought, finally, someone in his family has a shred of decency. Wrong. She went on about how Clark said I'd been acting odd lately, and that he'd caught me cheating. I reread her text 3 times, floored. This guy had told his entire family I'd betrayed him, claiming he left me so dramatically because I broke his heart. Now his family sees me as the unfaithful one who crushed their poor son, rallying around him like he's a victim. Marie texted about how disappointed she was, thinking I was better than that, and how Clark was struggling but staying strong. I was shaking with rage. For years of treating his family like my own, Christmases, birthdays, vacations, and this was my reward. Clark lied to cover up that he ditched me for someone with deeper pockets. I called Clark, and he actually answered, probably expecting me to beg. Instead, I tore into him about his lies. He had the nerve to say it was easier for his family to think I cheated than to explain the messy financial stuff. He said his parents were asking too many questions about his sudden exit, and admitting it was about money would stir up drama. So, he made me the bad guy to avoid scrutiny. He even suggested I go along with it for a cleaner breakup, saying it'd stop his family's questions and let us both move on. I hung up and started calling his family to set the record straight. But Clark had beaten me to it. His mom, dad, Thomas, and sister Melanie all had the same story. I was a cheater, Clark the heartbroken victim. They wouldn't hear me out. Melanie claimed Clark showed them proof of my affair, ordinary work texts with a male co-worker that he'd twisted to look shady. The worst was talking to his dad, Thomas, who'd always treated me like family. He'd walk me down the aisle at his daughter's wedding when my dad was away, call me his bonus daughter. Now he was lecturing me about my poor choices and how I'd shattered Clark's heart. I tried explaining the restaurant incident, the voice message, and Clark's affair with Avery. But Thomas said Clark had warned them I'd spin lies to save face. So now I'm not just humiliated and abandoned. I'm facing a family that thinks I'm a deceitful cheater because Clark found it more convenient than admitting he left for money. But Clark underestimated me. I'm not some defenseless victim who will just take this. If he wants to trash my reputation, he's about to see what happens when you cross someone with nothing left to lose. He forgot I have access to our shared accounts and 4 years of proof about our relationship. While he was busy painting himself as a betrayed hero, I was collecting evidence. Bank statements showing I paid most of our bills, social media photos of us happy together until the money stopped, texts where Clark never hinted at suspecting infidelity. Best of all, I found his Instagram messages with Avery, heart emojis, private jokes, meetup plans, all while he was still living with me, pretending to be devoted. So, Clark wasn't just a gold digger. He was a cheater who accused me of cheating to hide his own betrayal and his real motive for leaving. I sent screenshots of these messages to Marie with a detailed account of how her son humiliated me in that restaurant, cheated with Avery, and lied to dodge the truth about chasing a richer partner. Her reply? I was obsessed and delusional and needed to stop harassing their family. She said Clark had warned them I might go unhinged post-breakup and cause trouble for him and Avery. That's when I realized Clark had played this masterfully. He didn't just steal 4 years of my life. He turned his family against me, framing me as the crazy ex who can't let go. Second update. Your comments are blowing me away, and I have to share what happened next because this story gets even wilder, and I'm still grappling with how truly vile Clark is. After his family dismissed my evidence and called me delusional, I felt like I was losing my mind. How do you fight someone who's rewritten reality so completely that even people who've known you for years believe you're lying? Then my mom called, and her first words were, "We know what Clark did to his family, and we're not letting him get away with it." Turns out, my parents have been in touch with Clark's parents for years. That MY parents and Clark's family had exchanged contact details at family gatherings and followed each other online over the years. When my mom saw Marie's post portray me as the cheating girlfriend who broke her son's heart, she was enraged. She told me she'd already confronted Marie over the phone to set things straight, and their talk was fiery. Marie stood by Clark's version, swearing her son wouldn't lie about something so serious, and accusing my family of shielding me from my own mistakes. Then my mom did something that made me both proud and anxious. She invited Clark's whole family to dinner to sort out the truth face to face. Amazingly, they agreed to come. Marie, Thomas, Melanie, and even Clark's grandmother Veda, whom I cherished, arrived at my parents' house that Sunday evening, likely thinking they'd expose my family for raising a deceitful cheater. My mom later described the dinner as a war zone from the start. Marie immediately expressed her disappointment in me, saying she trusted me with her son's heart. Thomas added how he'd embrace me as family, only to feel betrayed. But my dad was prepared. He'd compiled everything: bank records, social media captures, text conversations, even security footage from our apartment building showing Clark's movements during the months he was supposedly loyal. When my dad laid out this evidence on the dining table, Clark's family went quiet. Marie tried to argue the proof could be fabricated, but Thomas began reviewing the documents, his expression shifting. The Instagram exchanges between Clark and Avery were particularly damning. Hundreds of messages, starting months before my dad cut off the allowance, filled with heart emojis, secret meetup plans while I was working, and Clark venting about pretending things were fine at home while planning his exit. The worst was a message where Clark told Avery he was biding his time to leave me, making sure I'd look like the bad guy so his family wouldn't judge him for abruptly ending our 4-year relationship. Melanie, reading over her dad's shoulder, broke into tears, saying she couldn't fathom her brother's cold, calculated cruelty. Veda just shook her head, whispering, "This isn't the boy I raised." Then my mom dropped the real bombshell. She told Clark's family that my dad had deliberately stopped the allowance to test Clark's behavior under pressure. She explained that my parents had doubted Clark's intentions for months and wanted to see his true nature. Thomas asked my dad straight up if it was true, and my dad confirmed it, saying they'd monitored Clark's actions during the test, and his response was worse than they'd imagined. Marie got defensive, calling the test manipulative and unfair. My mom swiftly shut that down, saying they hadn't tested Clark's love but his character, and he'd failed spectacularly by choosing cruelty over care. Then my dad played recordings of my calls with Clark, where he trashed my character and bragged about Avery being better than me. Hearing their son's voice, so vicious and scheming about someone he claimed to love for 4 years, shook his family. Still, they weren't ready to concede. Thomas argued that even if Clark mishandled things, I should have been open about the family's financial situation instead of letting him think we were in a real crisis. That's when I lost it. I'd been sitting there, hearing them justify their son's cruelty, and I couldn't stay silent. I stood and yelled that Clark never bothered to ask what was happening with my family. He just assumed I'd screwed up and treated me like garbage. I told them their precious son had humiliated me publicly, lied to them about why he left, and tried to ruin my reputation to hide his own cheating and money-chasing ways. Marie shouted back that I was being theatrical and that relationships fall apart for many reasons. She admitted Clark might have messed up, but said that didn't make him a monster. Melanie, however, was through defending her brother. She said she'd always felt something was off about how quickly Clark moved on with Avery, and now she understood why. She apologized to me, ashamed of her family's treatment. Thomas kept searching for excuses, suggesting Clark was confused or scared about the money and didn't handle it well. He said we were all overreacting and that young people make relationship mistakes. My dad wasn't having it. He said Clark's actions weren't a mistake, but a calculated pattern of manipulation and cruelty that revealed his true self. He told Thomas that no man who publicly shames a woman he claimed to love deserves excuses or forgiveness. The argument grew so heated that Veda finally spoke up, telling everyone to stop yelling. She said she'd heard enough and was deeply ashamed of her grandson's actions. She locked eyes with me and expressed regret for her family's treatment of me. However, Marie stood her ground, insisting that even though Clark had faltered, my family had no justification for secretly testing their bond. She labeled my parents as deceitful and overbearing. My mother erupted in response, declaring that any parent who raised a son capable of Clark's cruelty had no right to preach about deception. She pointed out that Clark's actions mirrored the principles he'd absorbed at home. The dinner spiraled into chaos, with both families shouting at one another. Thomas backed Marie, while my dad defended my mom, and I stood in the center, struggling to hold myself together. Yet, something significant had shifted. Clark's web of lies was unraveling. Melanie and Vader now supported me, and even Thomas seemed unsettled by proof of his son's scheming and dishonesty. The following day, Melanie reached out to me directly. She revealed she confronted Clark, and the exchange had been excruciating. At first, Clark clung to his falsehoods, but when Melanie presented undeniable evidence, he crumbled and confessed. According to her, Clark admitted he'd fabricated the cheating narrative to cover his embarrassment over abandoning me for financial gain. He'd panicked when his family probed, thinking it simpler to cast me as the villain. Even in his admission, Clark tried to rationalize his choices, claiming our relationship was doomed regardless and that the money issue was merely the tipping point. He argued I was better off without him and that everyone should move forward. Melanie was appalled by her brother's cold, calculated disregard for my feelings. She told him she was repulsed by his actions and demanded he confess to his parents, but Clark refused, arguing that revealing the truth now would only stir more trouble and hurt others. He insisted I'd recover in time, and that exposing his lies would worsen things for everyone. That's when Melanie realized her brother wasn't just dishonest. He lacked any empathy or regret for the pain he'd caused me. She described it as speaking to a stranger wearing her brother's face. Determined, she vowed to ensure her parents learned the truth, regardless of Clark's wishes, stating their family owed me a profound apology and that Clark needed to face repercussions. Convincing Marie and Thomas, however, would be tough, as they'd built their perspective around Clark as the victim, and admitting their error meant acknowledging their mistreatment of me based on lies. Meanwhile, Clark was feeding Avery a story that his unhinged ex-girlfriend was trying to sabotage his family ties with false accusations. Avery took to social media, lamenting how some people can't accept a relationship's end and stir drama for attention. I was now battling on multiple fronts. Clearing my name with Clark's family, countering his lies to his new girlfriend, and watching him portray himself as a victim while painting me as the obsessive ex unable to let go. Asterisk. Here's the latest update. Folks, I can hardly describe this week's events because Clark's world imploded in the most dramatic fashion, and I'm relishing every second of his pitiful collapse. Remember how Melanie was working to convince her parents of Clark's deceit? She didn't need to push too hard, as my dad took matters into his own hands and contacted Thomas directly. He said he had critical information about Clark and insisted on an in-person meeting. Thomas agreed, likely assuming my dad wanted to smooth things over or apologize. He was mistaken. My dad arrived at Thomas's office armed with a dossier of evidence that obliterated Clark's falsehoods. Beyond Instagram messages and recordings, my dad had been tracking Clark's behavior for months during the tests, compiling proof that would stun Thomas. There were photos of Clark dining at lavish restaurant with Avery, while claiming we couldn't afford meals out, credit card statements showing gifts for Avery while he grumbled about our budget, and, worst of all, a recording from a family barbecue where Clark quizzed my mom about inheritance laws, calculated my value as potential spouse based on what he thought he'd inherit. Thomas listened in stunned silence, and my dad said you could see his face transform as he realized his son wasn't just a liar, but a calculating opportunist who'd manipulated their entire family. It gets wilder. After absorbing the evidence, Thomas didn't just apologize to my dad. He summoned Clark to his office immediately for an urgent family meeting. Clark arrived, assuming his dad wanted to discuss the trouble I was supposedly causing. Instead, Thomas played the recordings of Clark's cruel words about me and his scheming over my family's money. Clark's face reportedly drained of color as his lies collapsed. Thomas unleashed his fury, expressing disgust at raising a son capable of such heartlessness and deceit, declaring he'd never felt more ashamed. Clark tried to deflect, arguing the test was unjust and his reaction understandable under the circumstances. He claimed everyone was overreacting and that relationships sometimes end messily. Thomas, unmoved, ordered Clark to move out of the apartment immediately, refusing to fund rent for someone so callous. Clark panicked, unable to afford the place alone, but Thomas said that was his problem. Thomas also reclaimed the car he'd been helping Clark finance, unwilling to support someone of such poor character. Clark pleaded, promising to improve, but Thomas declared it too late. Clark had revealed his true self, and there were no second chances for such betrayal. Within a day, Clark went from a comfortable apartment and reliable car to being essentially homeless and without transportation, too proud to tell Avery the truth. He scrambled to find a place to stay without admitting his family had cut him off. Melanie said Clark was crashing with his old college roommate, Hugo, while telling Avery he was temporarily between apartments, searching for something better. He claimed his car was in the shop to explain his reliance on Ubers. But his lies began to crumble when Avery pressed to see his place and meet his family. Clark dodged with excuse after excuse, and Avery grew wary of his evasiveness. Then Clark made his dumbest move yet. He started calling me, begging for help to explain things to Avery. He wanted me to back his story about our breakup, to make him seem less erratic to his new girlfriend. When he first called, I was so stunned I nearly hung up, but I saw an opportunity to dismantle him entirely. I let him grovel. Clark began with his usual spiel about making mistakes, but urged us to move on maturely. He said he just needed me to talk to Avery once to clarify some misunderstandings about our relationship. I laughed in his face, telling him the only misunderstanding was him thinking I'd ever assist him after his betrayal. I called him a pathetic failure who'd ruined his own life with his greed and cruelty. Clark grew heated, insisting I owed him basic courtesy because of our 4-year history, and accused me of being spiteful for refusing. That's when I unleashed on him. I said he discarded 4 years of love for non-existent money, humiliated me publicly, and lied to his family about my fidelity. He deserved every consequence. Clark broke down, sobbing, begging me to recall our good times, claiming I knew he wasn't truly bad. I countered that the test had exposed his true character, someone who betrayed a loved one for convenience, selfish and heartless. His family was right to disown him. Clark grew desperate, offered to confess to Avery about our breakup if I'd help conceal his eviction. He even promised to admit to his family he'd lied about my cheating if I covered for him. I refused to help him deceive another woman, as he had me, saying Avery deserved to know who she was dating and what happened to those who trusted him. Clark lost it, screaming that I was a vindictive ex trying to ruin his life out of jealousy, insisting I needed to let go. I laughed harder, telling him I wasn't destroying his life. He'd done that himself with his choices. I was grateful he'd revealed his true nature before I wasted more time on him. Clark kept calling from new numbers after I blocked him, each call more frantic. He offered money, then threatened to claim I was harassing him, before reverting to begging. In our final talk, he was utterly broken, admitting Avery was asking questions he couldn't answer, and Hugo was tiring of him. He said he didn't know what to do if his lies kept unraveling. I told him he should have considered consequences before choosing cruelty, and that he'd made his bed. The absolute highlight came when Avery somehow got my number and called. She mentioned Clark had named me as his ex and wanted to clear up things she'd heard. I was thrilled, barely containing my excitement. I told her I'd gladly share the truth about Clark and our relationship, detailing the restaurant humiliation, his lies to his family, and months of mistreatment when he thought I was broke. Avery was silent for a long moment before saying Clark's version of our breakup painted me as unstable and obsessive, claiming he'd ended it for his safety. I sent her screenshots of Clark's Instagram messages flirting with her while living with me and explained the test my parents conducted, which Clark failed by choosing cruelty over loyalty. Avery said she was beginning to see why Clark was so cagey about his living situation and family. She thanked me for my honesty and said she had much to consider. The next day, Melanie called, laughing, because Clark had shown up at his parents' house, sobbing and pleading for them to take him back. He admitted Avery dumped him after our talk, and he had nowhere to go. Marie and Thomas told him he'd made his choices and had to face the consequences, refusing to enable.